Live. You may be live. Okay. I had talked about the other genre a bit, the Greek mythology, and I had showed the other King Arthur books, but I don't still have Book of Merlin and some of the other ones. But of course, most people now, younger people especially, who want to get into the whole dark academia thing or vibe or whatever, are more interested in contemporary fiction. But I think that if you're going to be a well-rounded scholar or pseudo-scholar, as the case may be, at least you should have some books lying around that may not be true dark academia, but are tangentially still related. Now, of course, some of these, I know I was assigned in high school and maybe didn't care for that much. Some of these are more action adventure, really, than, you know, and as I said before, pop culture more than academia. Yet, I still think they have a place, even if we're familiar with them, but haven't necessarily read them all, right? Like starting with something of that nature. And similarly, some of these are going to be more folklore. Some of these are going to be borderline mythology. Some of them are just the entertainment of the day. I had talked about, of course, my previous video. I wanted to show these covers and messed up, but doesn't matter because they belong better in this list anyway. But they're even poetry, of course, more than fiction. So, of course, going straight from the Inferno and then taking a left turn to get to Paradiso through Purgatorio. And of course, I had talked about famous painting by Guy being similarly themed. And then, of course, we have, you know, like I said, your standard kind of high school stuff that may or may not be the kind of thing they make you still read anymore, but, you know, some things I had definitely read way back when. Don't quiz me on them now. The Coming of Grendel, and of course this one's quite a bit longer. Again, I don't know, you know, how much passages and things you can really read on YouTube without they flag you for somebody else's. I mean, this is public domain, certainly the text, but the translation of the text, blah, blah, blah. So without copyright ado issues, I can't, you know, judge how much of that I really want to get into. But of course, this being like what the bridge between the old English and the more modern English or something from this one, where again, if I tried to read this version, yeah, this is contemporary prose more like than likely the original Gilgamesh epics and all that would have been written. And of course, Dante, there's many translations of this. How much of this is microtype, I don't know. But of course, a lot of it is addendums and things. I don't even know how much is the actual poetry and how much is notes on the poetry. So yeah, the really, really small writing is not the actual poetry, but of course, Italian was codified using him as their guide, apparently. So things I've learned in the last year on YouTube. But then, of course, more Like I said, I already showed the Arthur books in the previous. Some of them were from the 1400s, and some of them were more contemporary things. But like I said, the through line going through, but then having similar things. I had a copy of Ivanhoe, and I never got around to reading it because a friend came over, saw it on my shelf, laughed, and made fun of me or whatever. You're reading Ivanhoe or what? I don't know. So I don't know why I got gun shy or whatever. But of course, you have things like this, which have been made into films, much more easy. But you know, how faithful is the film to the book? Probably your guess is as good as mine. But there's been 3 different versions of the film, I think now, or at least 2. This one, which of course may be the most loosely based on reality of anything ever, but you know, certainly this is a more likely a novelization from the film than an actual novel that became the film. I don't know. I just thought it would be a good one to show, since I do a lot of videos about kilts and old style costuming and that kind of thing. Then of course you always have, you know, again, another major motion picture cover version. I had not read the entirety of this. I had the illustrated classics and of all those kind of things way back when I was young. I mean, you know, that's thick. That's a book, you know, that's a book and a half. Where we had 600 pages, so that's almost 3 regular contemporary novels, right? So I'm lazy. Maybe I'll read it. Maybe I won't. I had read most of Count of Monte Cristo in 8th grade. And like I said, I had read this when I was younger, so I never got around to reading the whole thing. Although I certainly was familiar with the story at the time. And of course, then I I had read the Tolkien things, but I was not that terribly interested in them. I liked The Hobbit, and I liked some of the Lord of the Rings that I really understood. And then I don't know if I should include that in here, but obviously I didn't bring those books. They're, you know, the most popular fantasy books of the 20th century, but I was more into sci-fi or space fantasy or whatever you want to call it. But when I was, you know, getting really into reading at that age, and so I had kind of lost my, not affection for, but I don't know, just penchant for, or what, you know, desire to read a lot of more earthy. Like I never really read I never really read Westerns. I had a few. I never really read a lot of horror books. Had very, very few of those. But you know, a lot of Ray Bradbury and some Isaac Asimov and some other things. So going back and revisiting some of these would actually be something I would like to do, which is why I collected some of them more recently than others, in fact. Although I did buy this one quite a while ago and read parts of it, but I didn't read the whole thing. I don't remember. I don't tend to damage my books too badly when I'm just kind of perusing them, so it's hard to remember what I've read and what I haven't. So usually it's daunting to know I'll have to start from the beginning if I want to remember anything. So that's that. So yeah, so much shorter video this time, but nobody's watched the last one anyway, and I don't know if anybody will be that interested terribly in Greeks and Romans, because again, it's not contemporary, and a lot of it is poetry and stage stuff. Not as much poetry here and not much stage stuff, but again, stuff that's easily, adaptable, because you know, there's been Popeye episodes and other things made out of this, and certainly B movies, if not any others, of like Sinbad and that kind of thing. And then, yeah, like I said, Braveheart, everybody kind of took that one. That one came out, I think, the same year as Rob Roy, in fact, but became the bigger hit. film. So there, it happens. But yeah, again, this is now a major motion picture, but I don't know, again, if this was the book came out first or not, but it just says copyright 1995, which is the same year as the film. So I'm going to assume that when you make a film and the book comes out the same year that the screenplay came first, I'll wager. Yes, I know I'm skipping a lot of stuff, and intentionally so. Like I said, to keep this video short, we can always do another one later. And as usual, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, where we'll suss out some sort of conversation regarding classic literature or really old stuff. There's some other stuff that I have that's what do you call that? Like, where it wasn't written at the time, but it's written to be like the time. That's, brain fart. Whereas, yeah, the real deal, of course, this, but then less romantic, right? Whereas I think there's quite a bit of more of this kind of thing coming out, getting published now. Obviously, it would be impossible for us to write as people of that time now, because we're not of that time. So we have to pretend that we're of that time if we're going to write it in first person. And this is not an essay on how to write stories anyway, but you know what I'm talking about. Whereas, again, a lot of the contemporary fiction will become more dated and forgettable, though, in time than some of these old things that may or may not seem boring or unappealing or whatever, but that used to be, again, required reading in many cases for one reason or another. Well, okay, I'll stop it there.